Well, it's Pride Month, and Minneapolis officials just opened a door that should have stayed closed for a long time. And I'm gonna warn you, if you have a weak stomach, probably best to skip this one. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey just signed a bill reopening gay bathhouses and adult sex venues that were closed 38 years ago during the height of the AIDS epidemic. Frey celebrated the reversal of the closure of these gay sex venues as some kind of civil rights victory. Take a look.
This is the bathhouse ordinance. Everybody ready?
The ban was first enacted in 1988, and the reason was obvious. Gay men were being promiscuous and trolling for anonymous sex in these bathhouses and sex venues, and so in order to stop the prolific spread of AIDS through the gay community, they decided to shut the doors. But Frey and other Minneapolis officials are arguing that there's some kind of moral panic surrounding these bathhouses, and that whatever threat may have existed in the 80s doesn't exist now. I think monkeypox would beg to differ. And even Anthony Fauci, who's now like the patron saint of science for liberals, agreed with the decision to close these bathhouses and sex venues. In a 2021 interview, Fauci described going into some of these establishments in New York and San Francisco during the AIDS epidemic, and he noticed immediately what the problem was. As he told it, he recognized a, quote, perfect setup for an explosion of a sexually transmitted disease. It was true then, and it's true now, that HIV is transmitted more prolifically through certain sexual behaviors. The riskiest type of sex is anal sex, and bad news for you bottoms out there, but you carry the highest risk. But don't worry, I hear that HelloFresh is a safe space for you. Having multiple sexual partners, particularly ones who are also engaging in promiscuous behavior, also increases the risk. STD transmission, it turns out, is not deterred by pride flags and bondage gear. All of the once commonly understood ways to reduce your risk for contracting HIV have now been deemed stigmatizing for the gay community. Well, sorry, but sometimes stigma can save lives. And let's be really clear here. The people who decide that they're okay with the risk and they want to engage in promiscuous sexual activities aren't the only ones who are at risk when STDs start ripping through the country. Many people forget this, but one of the ugliest chapters of the AIDS epidemic was what happened to the blood supply. When AIDS started showing up in hemophiliacs, the public health establishment was flummoxed. Why was the disease no longer mostly confined to gay bathhouses or intravenous needle users? Well, in part, it's because a lot of gay people and needle users at the time were donating blood in plasma. In fact, if you look at a lot of public reporting at the time, people within the gay community talked about how they would do plasma and blood donation for money in order to fund drugs and sex. Hemophiliacs who rely on regular blood transfusions to survive were getting the pints of tainted blood. And when they started testing positive for the virus, public health officials hesitated. They debated for years whether they should ask high-risk groups to stop donating. They resisted aggressive screening. They worried about stigmatizing gay men. And all the while, people who relied on blood products were exposed to a deadly disease that they did nothing to invite. When all was said and done, roughly 10,000 hemophiliacs contracted HIV during the AIDS epidemic. Former FDA Commissioner Marty McCary talked about this crisis in his book Blind Spots. He used it as an example of what happens when public health officials are too invested in groupthink and politics to do the right thing. 4 decades later, and this isn't the history that we're taught about AIDS. What shows up in textbooks is that President Ronald Reagan just hated gay people and didn't care if they died, and that's why the AIDS epidemic lasted so long. Public officials similarly describe what happened then as just a case of rampant homophobia. The truth is, we actually could have saved a lot of lives if people were just willing to state the obvious. Gay men should have been told to stop having sex with hundreds of people in weird anonymous sex clubs. They should have been told to refrain from giving blood. And they should have moved quickly to test the blood supply or at least prevent high-risk groups from donating. I mean, duh. Now, nearly 40 years after it was first implemented, Minneapolis is taking a victory lap over repealing a policy that was meant to prevent another public health catastrophe. Supporters are acting like the city just defeated Jim Crow, when in reality, they've just reopened the very kind of venues that allowed AIDS to rip through the gay community in the first place. Happy Pride, I guess.